Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now today, I'm going back to a guy no one asked for. That is, made by Jim Bob.
Praise to him, Jim Bob.
You know what? No. He doesn't deserve the greatness of Robin Williams. Anyway, Jim Bob here has something like a series going which he has titled Arguments Against Atheism. Well, I love looking at these arguments and seeing what's what. I've already thoroughly dissected episode 1. He didn't label it as such, but it seems episode 2 is just talking about the problem of evil, which I have covered at length. So that means today we're checking out episode 3. So let's see what Jim Bob has for his next argument against atheism.
Only heaven silent for an answer.
When you ask an atheist, why is it they don't believe in God? One of the most common responses is, I don't see any good evidence. In this video, I'm going to explain why the atheist thinks this is a good reason and why it's in fact not a good reason.
Let's pause right here at the introduction. Well, I don't see any good evidence may indeed be a common response from atheists, and I'll grant that point. There's already a significant issue. Jim Bob here claims he's going to explain why the atheist thinks this is a good reason. This is a perfect example of mind reading, claiming to know the internal thought processes of a diverse group of people who share only one characteristic, non-belief in deities. This kind of sweeping generalization about why people hold their positions is precisely what weakens many apologetic arguments from the start. Oof, not off to a great start.
Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism. I'm Jim Bob. I'm here to give you the goods. So when an atheist says, I don't believe in God because I don't see any good evidence, what they mean is they don't see physical evidence.
This is a significant mischaracterization. When atheists say they don't see good evidence, they could be referring to multiple types of evidence: direct, indirect, philosophical, or corroborating evidence. Jim Bob's immediate jump to physical evidence creates a straw man of the atheist position. But let's grant his premise for a moment. When someone makes an ontological claim, that is, a claim about what exists in reality, it's entirely reasonable to ask what detectable effect that thing has on reality. If something exists and interacts with our universe, we should expect to see its influence somewhere, somehow. This isn't an unreasonable standard. It's basic cause and effect.
Now I wonder, are there any underlying assumptions being made in regards to what evidence is? Well, let's take a look. One obvious assumption the atheist makes is that all truth claims are empirical claims, which is a false starting assumption. Not all truth is obtained in the same way. If there are different ways of arriving at the truth of different types of claims, and God's existence isn't the empirical category, then we've already spotted a category error.
Let me take a look at two critical errors in this argument. First, there's the claim that atheists believe all truth claims are empirical claims. This is demonstrably false. Any atheist philosopher or even serious thinker recognizes multiple categories of truth claims. Analytical claims are like mathematical proofs and logical deductions, which are true by definition. 2 plus 2 equals 4 in base 10 isn't empirically proven. It's true by the definition of these numbers and operations. Moral or ethical claims deal with values and obligations. Whether causing unnecessary suffering is wrong isn't an empirical question. And one more, aesthetic claims. These are about beauty and art, which are subjective experiences rather than empirical facts. But here's the crucial distinction. While truth claims can be non-empirical, claims about what exists in external reality must have some empirical component. Everything we perceive about the external world comes through our senses. This isn't an assumption, it's the foundation of how we interact with reality. Jim Bob here attempts to place God's existence entirely outside the empirical category while simultaneously claiming God interacts with reality. This is self-contradictory. If something exists outside of the mind and interacts with the physical world, it must leave detectable traces. You can't claim something affects reality while also claiming it's completely undetectable in reality. This isn't a category error on the atheist's part. It's a logical contradiction in the argument itself. Jim Bob confuses the distinction between abstract truth claims and existence claims about reality.
The atheist also assumes that a standard for sufficient evidence has been established. Is there only one type of evidence? No. But in this case, empirical evidence is the standard they are going with.
This argument presents several problems. First, he's claiming atheists have assumed a standard for sufficient evidence has been established. This mischaracterizes the scientific and philosophical approach to evidence. Scientists and philosophers, atheists and theists alike, have developed rigorous methodologies for evaluating empirical claims over centuries. This isn't an assumption. It's a refined process built on centuries of investigation and peer review. But let me address the deeper issue. What alternative standard is being proposed here? Jim Bob criticizes empirical evidence as insufficient, but offers no alternative methodology for determining what exists in reality. This is a common apologetic tactic, criticizing established methods without providing a better framework. So here's my challenge. Can any alternative standard of evidence be proposed that couldn't be used to justify beliefs in other gods or contradictory religious claims? If someone claimed Zeus was real based on personal revelation, or that Vishnu exists because of philosophical necessity, would these standards be accepted? If not, why should they be accepted for one particular god? The problem isn't that atheists have arbitrarily chosen empirical evidence as their standard. Rather, empirical evidence has proven to be the most reliable method for determining what exists in objective reality. It's not perfect, but it is self-correcting and has demonstrated a track record of success. If there's a better method for determining what exists in reality, it needs to be demonstrated and not just not asserted.
So let's see if they apply the empirical standard to their own beliefs. Is there anything the atheist believes or assumes without empirical evidence? Does the atheist believe in knowledge? Yes. Is there any evidence? No. Does the atheist believe that the regularity in nature will maintain tomorrow? Is there any evidence? No. How about the laws of logic? Is there any physical, empirical evidence for the law of identity? Does the atheist believe in concepts or universal categories, meaning? These are all examples of things the atheist does in fact believe in. They exist in a particular way, but they are not empirically verified.
Let me unpack this series of claims because there's a lot to address here. First, we're still dealing with the strawman argument that atheists only accept empirical truth claims, which I've already shown isn't true. But let's examine each of these examples carefully. Let's take the laws of logic. Jim Bob here asks if there's empirical evidence for them, implying that there isn't. But there's a fun proof for the laws of logic. You can't attempt to disprove them without assuming that they're true. Try to argue that the law of identity isn't real, and you've already assumed that your argument is identical to itself. Try to argue that contradictions can be true, and you've assumed your argument isn't simultaneously false. The laws of logic are foundational to rational thought itself. Now let's talk about knowledge and concepts. Yes, atheists can believe in these things, but some may not believe in them the same way we believe in physical objects. Concepts exist as mental constructs, patterns of thought and understanding that we use to make sense of the world. They're tools of cognition, not physical entities. When we say something like, justice exists, we don't mean it exists in the same way that a tree exists. This is a crucial distinction that Jim Bob glosses over here similarly to his first video in the series. Regarding the regularity of nature, this is actually based on empirical evidence. We have billions of observations showing that natural laws remain consistent. While we can't prove with absolute certainty that they'll continue tomorrow, we have overwhelming evidence that they do continue consistently. This isn't blind faith. It's a reasonable conclusion based on observed patterns. What's particularly interesting is how this argument tries to equate different types of existence. It's like he's saying, if you believe in the concept of numbers, you must accept belief in God. But this ignores the fundamental differences between abstract concepts, logical necessities, and claims about conscious active beings existing in reality.
So I think we have enough examples to demonstrate the atheist doesn't really apply their empirical standard to their own beliefs, but they certainly love to use it against Christianity. Now, of course, the atheist will say, well, those aren't my beliefs. Those are just my axioms. Okay, then my axiom is God exists. To further demonstrate the flaw in their empirical standard, what if we use their argument against God's existence against some of the things they believe and see how it sounds? I don't believe in truth. There's no empirical evidence. I don't believe information exists because there's no physical evidence. I don't think knowledge exists because I can't see, taste, or touch it. Where it leads to is absurdity.
Okay, this section contains several logical fallacies that need to be addressed. Let me break this down. First, Jim Bob here is still attacking his strawman version of atheists who only accept empirical evidence, a position, again, I've already shown isn't actually held by atheists. But let's move on to his main argument about axioms, because it really does reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of what axioms are. Axioms are basic assumptions that serve as a starting point for reasoning. They should be self-evident or necessary for coherent thought. When we accept logical axioms, it's because they're necessary for any rational discourse to occur. When we accept mathematical axioms, it's because they're necessary for mathematical reasoning to work. These aren't arbitrary, they're foundational. But here's where Jim Bob's arguments fall apart. Claiming God exists as an axiom is fundamentally different. It's not necessary for coherent thought or reasoning. People can and do reason perfectly well without assuming God exists. This makes it not an axiom, but rather a proposition that requires justification. His attempt at a reductio ad absurdum, saying we can't believe in truth or information because we can't empirically prove them, misses the mark entirely. These concepts are understood through different types of reasoning than empirical observation, which, like I said, atheists already acknowledge. Truth is a necessary concept for any meaningful discourse. Information is demonstrably real through its effects. Knowledge is evidenced by our ability to make reliable predictions and understand our world. What's particularly interesting is how this argument actually undermines itself. If we accepted God exists as an axiom, we'd have to accept that anyone can have any proposed deity as an axiom. Want to claim Zeus exists as an axiom? Or no gods exist as an axiom? By Jim Bob's logic, these would be equally valid, which demonstrates why his understanding of axioms is flawed.
So it seems as though any argument the atheist levies against God's existence based on the physical evidence standard could be made against things like truth itself. The problem points to a larger issue with using mere sense data and empiricism as the foundation of truth. Another assumption we hear is the claim, science and empiricism is the best way to truth. Well, is that a truth claim? If it were true that science and empiricism is the best way to truth, shouldn't it be verified through the scientific method? Are you seeing the issue, atheists? Science and empiricism ironically rely wholly on immaterial concepts and assumptions that cannot be verified with those methods.
At this point, we're seeing the same strawman argument recycled with a different wrapper. But there's an interesting logical fallacy here worth pointing out, an equivocation on the word truth. Here, Jim Bob is conflating different types of truth and different methods of verification as if they were the same thing. When scientists say empiricism is the best way to discover truths about the physical world, they're making a specific claim about investigating reality, not about all possible types of truth. This isn't the gotcha moment Jim Bob thinks it is. The argument that science can't verify itself through the scientific method also shows a fundamental misunderstanding of epistemology. Science is a methodology that has demonstrated its reliability through consistent results and predictive power. It doesn't claim to be the only path to all truth. It is a reliable method, arguably the best method for understanding the physical world, which it has repeatedly proven to be.
When it comes down to it, all knowledge is faith-based. There, I said it. The icky word, faith. Faith in the atheist view is belief without evidence, plain and simple. In the Christian view, the fact that everyone has faith is the evidence of things unseen, whether it's immaterial things like logic or truth or the notion of the past or the future or mind. There's no escaping a faith-based starting point. And the act of denying a faith-based starting point would require, well, faith in things without evidence. You see, the atheist puts faith in their reasoning. They put faith in their senses. The atheist might say, well, there's a difference between faith and confidence. I have confidence. Confidence relies on faith in other things like the regularity of nature, your own reasoning, reliability, which assumes a past, present, and future. There is no view that is wholly derived from evidence. Therefore, the basis for truth is not empirical.
This section reveals several significant problems. First, Jim Bob is making a common false equivalence between different types of faith. He's arguing that because we can't have 100% certainty about anything, all belief requires the same kind of faith as religious belief. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of both evidence and reasoning. Let's use a practical example. When I cook, I rely on my sense of smell. If I smell pepper in a dish, it's very likely that there's pepper in that dish. It isn't faith in my senses. It's confidence built on thousands of repeated verifications. My senses have been tested countless times and have been proven reliable. Sure, they're not perfect, but they're demonstrably trustworthy. That brings me to another crucial point. We don't need 100% certainty to have sufficient evidence for belief. If we did, we couldn't function at all. What we need is reasonable justification. I can demonstrate the universe exists to a reasonable degree. We can observe it, test it, make predictions about it. Jim Bob can't do the same thing with his God. Yes, we have some basic axioms we must accept to reason at all, but Occam's razor suggests we should accept the minimum necessary axioms. The universe demonstrably exists. We need that axiom, but we don't need to add God exists as an axiom because it's not necessary for coherent reasoning. Finally, Jim Bob keeps using the word truth without clear definition. Is he talking about empirical truth, logical truth, religious truth? This equivocation between types of truth undermines his entire argument.
If you don't believe me, just check the comments section of this video. For any opposing comment to this video, take note of the non-empirical, immaterial things they include in their comment. Ask them for evidence of those things.
Now, this is a rather telling moment in the video. Instead of engaging with actual philosophical arguments, Jim Bob is preemptively dismissing potential counter-arguments by suggesting viewers play gotcha with commenters. He's encouraging viewers to look for any use of abstract concepts in comments and demand empirical evidence for them, which continues his strawman argument that atheists only accept empirical evidence. This kind of rhetorical strategy actually reveals the weakness of his position. Rather than addressing the substantial philosophical arguments about different types of truth claims and evidence that atheist thinkers have made, he's reduced to a game of spot the abstract noun in YouTube comments.
In conclusion, if the question of God's existence is not an empirical question, and both the atheist and the Christian accept the existence of things that are empirically not verified, then who has a better account or explanation for the existence of truth or knowledge, the atheist or the Christian? It seems to me that the atheist takes freely a whole category of mind-dependent things that cannot be verified through empiricism. So why would we grant the atheist those things? I don't think we should. The atheist might say, those are just emergent properties of nature. Well, so if the laws of logic are a product of the brain, whose brain produces the correct laws of logic? Whose biochemistry is correct? And if the laws of logic exist external to the brain, whose biochemistry is accurately aligned with them?
Okay, Jim Bob's conclusion reveals several more fundamental problems with his entire argument. Let me address each one. First, he asserts that God's existence is not an empirical question. But like I said before, if God interacts with reality in any way through miracles, answering prayers, creating the universe, or influencing human events, then these interactions should be empirically detectable. If God has no detectable effects on reality, what exactly are we discussing? Feel free to use this. It's probably my favorite question to ask in situations like this. What is the difference between a God that has no demonstrable effects on reality and one that doesn't exist? Second, he creates a false dichotomy between atheistic and Christian explanations for truth and knowledge, while ignoring thousands of other religions and philosophical frameworks. Why would Christianity provide a better explanation than Buddhism or Hinduism or any other religious system? He never addresses this. His argument about whose brain produces the correct laws of logic misunderstands both logic and cognitive science. Logic isn't produced by brains. It's discovered through observation of what works and what doesn't. We recognize logical principles because they consistently match reality. They're not arbitrary products of biochemistry, but rather descriptions of how reasoning must work to be coherent. Finally, he makes the classic apologetic error of assuming that because naturalistic explanations might be incomplete, his preferred supernatural explanation must be correct. But adding God did it doesn't actually explain anything. It just pushes the question back one step. How does God's mind work? How does God's logic work? We end up with all the same questions, plus additional ones.
And we're back to my first episode of Arguments Against Atheism, where I present a massive problem for the materialist.
I already did a thorough breakdown of that video. I'll put a card up here if I remember. Long story short, it is Jim Bob critiquing atheism by conflating it with materialism and hard determinism. He argues that if thoughts, evaluations, and beliefs are merely effects of physics, they cannot be true or false, as physical effects, like tornadoes or blades of grass, lack propositional truth value. He concludes that this position undermines the possibility of logic, and its all beliefs, including atheistic and theistic ones, would be equally determined and devoid of truth or falsity. It isn't great, but I can see how someone who takes a surface-level look at it may find it intriguing. And that's the end of his video. I cut off here because the rest is just self-promotion. So what did he say here? What is his argument against atheism for this video? When an atheist says, "I don't believe in God because I don't see any good evidence," what they mean is they don't see physical evidence. The atheist presumes all truth claims are empirical claims. The atheist assumes a standard for sufficient evidence has been established, but there is more than one type of evidence. Atheists believe in knowledge, the regularity of nature, and the laws of logic without empirical evidence. If the atheist says their beliefs are axioms, then my axiom is that God exists. Science and empiricism rely on immaterial concepts and assumptions that cannot be verified by these methods. All knowledge is faith-based. But what do you think? Do you think MBJB has put forth a solid argument against atheism? Or do you think he misunderstood something somewhere? Do you agree with my perspective? Or do you think that I missed something important? Let me know in the comments below. So often, apologetic arguments falter by making these broad generalizations about atheists, ignoring the diversity of perspectives within non-belief. Claims about the existence of God must include detectable effects on reality to be meaningful, as empirical evidence remains the most reliable method for evaluating such claims. The distinction between axioms and propositions is crucial, as axioms are necessary for coherent reasoning, whereas the assertion that God exists requires justification. Confidence grounded in evidence differs fundamentally from religious faith, which often lacks the same evidentiary basis. Ultimately, invoking a God as an explanation tends to complicate understanding by introducing an unexplained entity, rather than clarifying the nature of reality. Overall, I give his video an 8 facepalmy Mr. Jesuses out of 10. His video falls into the common apologetic pitfalls by misrepresenting opposing viewpoints and making logical leaps without proper justification. While it raises some interesting philosophical questions about epistemology and the nature of knowledge, it fails to engage with these topics at a sophisticated level, or even acknowledge the extensive philosophical work done in these areas by both theist and atheist thinkers. That's it for this one. So what do you think? Did you find any of this useful? Do you have a different tactic when dealing with apologetics like this? I want to know your thoughts. If you appreciated the thinking thought that thoroughly thrashed this thesis, show that appreciation by hitting that like button. Though you can explore more excavations and potentially eviscerations of emphatically exposed strawmen by hitting that subscribe to help envision enveloping an entertaining examination of enunciated exegesis elocution. Speaking of expatiating, I need to express my unfortunately insignificant expatiation for my patrons, especially Calamitous Anima and Sora, and the rest of you excellent exhibits of ethics and etiquette. If you'd like to emit elegance, you can elect to exalt for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. That was a fun challenge coming up with and saying all of those. Anyway, each one of you helps keep me on track and honest. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. And as always, keep learning.